is your Navy in action. This is the Navy of the United States during 2 years of war, of training, of building, of rearming. Months that changed the lives of thousands of Americans in thousands of ways. In October 1952, a great fleet weighed anchor at Norfolk, Virginia, and got underway for a rendezvous 3,000 miles away. The destination, Scotland. The operation, Mainbrace. The mission, one that would make history. Peacetime maneuvers on a wartime scale, testing the ability of NATO navies to operate under a common command, to use common communications, and to hold to a common purpose. The fleets that joined at the rendezvous made a full armada. Carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, tankers, supply ships. 160 fighting ships from the NATO nations. Final plans were rechecked, while the ship's crew got acquainted with their Scottish host. Preparations completed, the fleet sailed out to the first part of the exercise. Carrier air support of ground forces defending Norway. The carrier planes struck at the mythical enemy strongholds in northern Norway, while the fleet engaged the enemy at sea. The fleet swung southward for the second part of the exercise, an amphibious landing to relieve the theoretically beleaguered Danish forces. Operation Mainbrace revealed some flaws in the organization of the NATO forces, flaws which were analyzed and corrected for the next year's exercise, Operation Mariner. Most important, the combined operations proved that NATO countries could work together for a common goal, freedom. To the south, in the strategic area of the Mediterranean, the 6th Fleet continued its training exercises. Its presence in southern waters was a powerful deterrent to aggression, a mighty and ever-present symbol of hope and reassurance to our friends. Mainbrace, Mariner, and the continued operations of the 6th Fleet would not have been possible without the Navy's facilities of transport and supply. For the 6th Fleet has no bases, is almost constantly on the move, and is completely self-sustaining. Look at this map. Each one of these tiny dots represents an American installation overseas. Supply bases, air stations, command headquarters, each an integral part of our defense system. Nearly all of these are dependent on the Navy for support and resupply. To these installations during the year, the Navy transported thousands of men of all services to Europe, Japan, Korea, Africa, and the Arctic. Navy cargo ships carried the goods to the fighting ships, and transferred tons of cargo at sea. The line is shot across, made fast to the supply ship, and cargo is ready within minutes to begin the trip to the cruiser. The ships maintain a steady course, a steady speed. Huge task forces in the world's oceans are resupplied daily in this fashion. What was once revolutionary is now routine. Even in rough weather, Navy tankers carry on the job of refueling the ships that must have fuel now to ride out the storm. Another part of the Navy's resupply job during the year was the maintenance of isolated weather stations and air bases in the polar regions, Alaska, and Greenland. Supply convoys would have found the journey impossible without the help of the Navy's sturdy icebreakers. Ramming and rolling, dynamiting when necessary, these ships slowly broke a path for the transports, leading them deeper into the Arctic ice pack. The strategic importance of these advanced bases is pointed up by the cooperation of all services in their maintenance. Future wars may well be decided by control of these frozen wildernesses. Only a few thousand miles away, in Korea, the Navy was engaged in a real and bloody war, fighting with UN ground and sea forces against the communist invaders. Thundering guns from our battle wagons and cruisers pounded coastal roads and rail lines leading to the front. The Navy's mission was interdiction, to cut the communist lines of support and communication. From carriers close offshore, north of the 38th parallel, strike after strike roared inland to attack the enemy's supply lines and troop concentrations. Panther and Banshee jet fighters hit bridges, tunnels, trucks, barracks, throwing thousands of rounds of ammunition into the battle for Korea. Propeller-driven planes, more suited to close support than the faster jets, backed up the ground forces calling for air cover. Spewing rockets on the approach, the pilots dropped tons of napalm and bombs on the enemy dug in on the mountainsides. Then raced back to the carrier base for another load. Men of the Marine Corps added new luster to their shining history, fighting with American and UN soldiers at Heartbreak Ridge, the Iron Triangle, Bunker Hill, until the war had run its course and uneasy peace settled over Korea. Helicopters had been in combat for the first time, rescuing pilots downed behind enemy lines and carrying Marine assault troops into action. Their appearance on the battlefield gave new hope to the injured. Fast pickup of wounded soldiers and Marines and quick transport to the waiting hospital ships kept our mortality rate far lower than in any other war. In the spring of 1953, the lessened tempo of the war meant that the Navy could release a destroyer division for a more pleasant mission. A combined training cruise and goodwill tour back to the United States, around the world. Liberty in ports of Japan, India, Arabia, and the Mediterranean gave the sailors an interlude of relaxation. The division's arrival at Atlantic Destroyer Headquarters in Newport, Rhode Island, meant a heartfelt welcome and a well-deserved leave with families throughout the nation. What was happening in the America that these men returned to? America was continuing to rearm, to retrain, resolved that the future would hold no more Pearl Harbors, resolved that any aggressive act would find the United States Armed Forces alert, prepared, and invincible. So we were building our Navy anew, building with new men, until we had grown into a force of 750,000 officers and men and 1,100 ships. Added to these men on active duty were our reserves, officers and enlisted men who spent many hours keeping themselves familiar with Navy developments and attending reserve classes and meetings. Now civilians in every kind of civilian job, they are ready to rejoin the fleet once more if the Navy should need them. This year, as in other years, the Naval Academy at Annapolis and the NROTC units of our largest colleges and universities trained thousands of young men for commissions in both the regular Navy and the Naval Reserve. A summer training cruise aboard fighting ships carried the midshipmen to distant ports. This was a voyage of discovery, when each midshipman stood on a heaving deck, breathed the salty air, and realized that he is a part of the Navy, and the Navy is a part of him. As we added men, we added ships. Research at model basins and test centers provided background for modification of some ship types and a complete redesign of others. Progress on the USS Forrestal, giant aircraft carrier, continued, and construction began on the first of two sister ships. This carrier class incorporates all design improvements since the Midway class of 1945. Steam catapults to launch the new, heavier aircraft, enlarged fuel storage tanks, and the angled flight deck, already installed on the USS Antietam. Replacing the former straight deck, the angled deck slants from the hull to permit landings on the stern while other planes are catapulted from the bow section. If the landing hook of the approaching plane does not engage the arresting gear, the pilot applies full power, takes off again, and comes around for another try. The danger of deck crashes is greatly reduced. A new ship type joined the fleet in 1953. This was the destroyer Leader, larger than a destroyer, smaller than a cruiser, and designed specifically as a task force command ship. Crammed with communications and radar gear, she satisfies a need dating from World War II. A decade of struggle culminated in the launching of the submarine Nautilus in early 1954. Her engines, powered by atomic energy, propel her farther and deeper than any submarine has ever gone. With the development of this engine, undersea warfare takes on new importance. Development of new weapons of war required the close cooperation of business and industry. So men prominent in these fields were invited to the Navy's 10th annual civilian orientation cruise. During a tour of Navy installations and a cruise aboard the USS Midway, the men were able to see the products of their work in action. Thousands of civilians across the United States flocked to air shows demonstrating the skill of Navy flyers and the superb performance of naval aircraft. Crowds thrilled to the precision flying of the Blue Angels. Everywhere in the world, Navy aircraft were proving their fitness for the tasks assigned them. Jets were now an integral part of the Navy's air arm, with the scream of their turbines heralding the arrival of the age of jet power. test centers across the United States, experienced pilots put new planes through their trials. The new Delta Wing interceptor, the Skyray, proved that a plane with supersonic speed qualities could also adapt to carrier deck operation. The Sea Dart is another speedy fighter adapted for fleet maneuvers, utilizing retractable hydro skis for landings and takeoff. The tailless twin-jet Cutlass, another fast fighter, was specially designed for fleet operations. Even faster than jet power is rocket power, as used in the Skyrocket, one of the Navy's experimental planes. Flights of such research aircraft at supersonic speeds are furnishing designers and scientists with valuable data on aerodynamics. At the Naval Ordinance Test Center in California, ordnance experts work to design more destructive, more accurate rocket weapons, both missiles and launchers. Though most missiles developed are highly classified, details on some are familiar to the American public. The Regulus, designed for shipboard launching, and the Sparrow, an air-to-air missile. Others are still wrapped in necessary secrecy. The Navy welcomed a new commander-in-chief and a new chief of naval operations. It took a long look at its budget, revising estimates, planning for a stronger Navy, more ships, bases, and services for the same amount of money. 160 naval vessels of all types were launched, from destroyers to landing craft. 50,000 men completed training and went to their new duty stations. And so your Navy moves through this critical period in history, an integral part of a multi-nation defense organization on one side of the globe, and fulfilling its United Nations obligation on the other side of the world. At sea, your Navy worked out new tactics, evaluated new weapons, tested new techniques, all in the light of a new world strategy. At home, we go on preparing, experimenting, developing, building, and planning. For the United States Navy, your Navy, has a responsibility today not surpassed in all its history. Eternal vigilance is its keynote. This is your Navy today.